You know that for some time, there was a period in the politics of South Africa where we were wrongly mobilized against President Zuma. Like to say, he's the most corrupt leader, the state capture, and all sorts of nonsensical characterization of the period where he was head of state and president. And we, of course, during that period, joined into the band, were gone and coincidentally joined by the establishment, and mostly by even the descendants of the settlers who got to go and do the Zuma must fall nonsense that got to happen that time. Then we pushed for state capture inquiry. But you know, the most important thing, I was thinking about it now systematically, that my turning point about the whole perception was actually the inquiry itself on state capture. That,
interesting.
Yeah, because I got to realize something which I think is very important, that one, there is no wrongdoing which was pointed on President Zuma in the whole inquiry. Zero. The star witness in the inquiry was Themba Maseko, who said, President Zuma said I must call the Guptas and everything else they like. But that's what he does every day. Like yesterday we were in a top 8 meeting. And then before the meeting started, he said that there are some people who are proposing a cooperative, please listen to them. That is what presidents do in any circumstance, that when a business person or whoever has got a proposal comes to you, you refer them to authorities, and then the authorities have got an obligation to make sure that they comply with the laws in fulfilling what they got to do. But 3-4 major issues that came out of the state capture inquiry, some of the things which we're not even aware of. One was President Zuma's commitment to safeguard South Africa's energy security. You know, there's a less spoken about deal on Engine, the oil company, which is owned by Petronas from Malaysia.
Okay.
So he had given a directive, a political guidance, that Petro SA should purchase majority stake in Engine, which was going to safeguard South Africa's energy security from the fuel point of view. And that is one of the issues which in the state capture inquiry was presented as a scandal. That no, he actually pushed us to give a guarantee of 20 billion, which is, by the way, nothing as compared to the benefits economically which South Africa was going to gain out of that. That was one. But two, the issue which we got to be misled about as well was on the question of the nuclear build program. Like if you listen to the details of it, the manner in which Eskom under Brian Molefe was directed to deal with that was the most progressive approach, because the nuclear build program was going to safeguard South Africa's electricity security, and also like to have electricity which was going to be even enough to industrialize the entire sub-region in all the countries in terms of what is required. And the mandate that was very clear was that if you can secure a fiscally neutral program to build nuclear energy in South Africa, please pursue that. And Brian Molefe explained that even in the parliamentary component of this so-called state capture inquiry, to say that we were going to do what is being done by these intermittent energy suppliers called independent power producers. And then we're going to say that, come those of you who have got capacity to give us 6,000 megawatts of nuclear build or nuclear power station, which is the cleanest and the cheapest, even in the bracket of the energy sources for Eskom, the cheapest and the cleanest source of energy comes from the Kubek nuclear power station, which is owned by Eskom. And that is part of the program which President Zuma politically was giving guidance on as to just what should happen. But also the intention to safeguard the supply of electricity in Eskom, but also to give Eskom the autonomy to not be bullied by the coal suppliers. So if you listen to the substantial components of what Eziyabonga Gama or Brian Molefe would give in the state capture inquiry, you realize that there were far much more deeper interest elsewhere, which sought to destabilize the state through destabilization of Eskom. And Brian says that President Zuma went to him to say that I'm aware that there are people who want to destroy Eskom so that we lose our autonomy as a country. Please go and stabilize the institution, the utility, so that we have got dependable electricity. And that is what exactly he did, and refused to be bullied by the criminal syndicates of the Glencores of this world who were bullying Eskom for the longest time in terms of the supply of coal. But also there's a lot of other issues which throughout we were made to believe that there's everything wrong that President Zuma is doing. But when the evidence came about, we then began to realize that actually what he has been in pursuit of is the most progressive agenda, which has to be defended and has to be protected. And personally, myself, it's the shift after all these revelations was clear, because I wrote about it publicly to say that it looks like we're misled about these issues. Even when later on he did not participate because they were trying to make mockery of him, and then there was that unlawful arrest that happened. I took public interviews with even international media, with a Turkish television platform, with Al Jazeera, to say that this is completely wrong, to criminalize a head of state who otherwise has not done anything wrong. Because if there's anything wrong which he could have done, even in his absence, they could have gone and led evidence and say that these are the wrong things that he did in terms of the so-called state capture. And then got to realize that the manner in which he was persecuted is linked broadly to the bastardization and criminalization of progressive left politics globally. It's more or less the same thing that was done to President Lula in Brazil. It's the manner in which they wanted to treat President Maduro in Venezuela, almost everywhere, wherever there's a progressive voice that rises, the global West and imperialist forces seek to collaborate with the locals to try to undermine the legitimacy of such a leader. And that is where it came from. And so from that political analysis and conviction, I then began to pay close attention to what President Zuma does and say, because when he was head of state and president, he did push for those issues which I consider to be progressive, and I think are actually conclusively progressive. You know that after the Feast Must Fall program, government, in a typical way, instituted a commission of inquiry as to whether there must be introduction of free education and everything else. And then they concluded that there must not be free education, by the way.
True.
And he defied that, and then he says, no, I'm not going to take this commission of inquiry. Let's introduce free education up until higher education level. And that showed the commitment to progressive politics, which otherwise would pursue for all forms of intimidations, against all forms of resistance that comes from elsewhere. And then I spoke on the 22nd of August, in the press conference where they said my role will be national organizer. So before the elections in October 2023, before Umkhonto is a party was publicly announced, we had very long discussions. It was a variety of other political parties as well, black progressive political parties.
Interesting.
And then he gave a very interesting diagnosis of what are the problems of our politics in South Africa.
This was President Zuma.
President Zuma, yes.
So he was actually there back in those times.
Yeah, in October 2023.
Okay.
He then gave an interesting diagnosis and even proper forecasting of what is going to happen. He said, look, I can see now that the ANC is totally captured by the white capitalist establishment. And they're going to force an alliance between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. And that broadly will be an alliance with the neo-colonial West in terms of the agenda. And we can't fold our arms and not do anything about that. We need to consolidate. Let's form one organization. Let's form one platform, not just organization. Let's form one campaigning platform.
Right.
Which is going to resist such a total takeover. And then we must fight for 2/3 majority. Actually, the first time there was a talk of 2/3 majority was in October 2023. And then, of course, that time it didn't sound believable. I was like,
yeah.
And then my input in that meeting was okay, of the parties that are here, the EFF is the biggest. Let's perhaps consider why don't we collapse everything else into EFF if you want to put an agenda? And then, of course, there was a deeper political characterization of the EFF, including identification of some of the subjective weaknesses that define the EFF, and which would make it impossible to constitute a broad front, or to be a broad front which could attract all sectors of society. And then we then agreed in principle, by the way, that let's go and have the campaigns separately,
right?
But we will converge later on because our politics are more or less the same. Then we went into elections on the principle that no malignment against each other, no trying to delegitimize each other in terms of who is who and everything else there. But in principle, we are aligned in terms of the politics that we are in pursuit of. And one of those politics is the anti-colonial, anti-neoliberal, anti-racist politics, progressive agenda, return of the land, return of the natural resources to the control and benefit of majority of the people. So that is what got to happen. And then, of course, the election results came out.
Yeah.
And he did not stay away from that commitment which came from October, because he had said, through some of the leaders who were there, that why is it that the EFF and all these other organizations are going to negotiate on what should happen with government separately? Why don't we negotiate as a bloc that we constituted? Let's go and talk in one voice so that there's clarity as to the politics that got to define South Africa moving forward.
Yeah.
In actual fact, I know that even when the MKP came to parliament, he once raised the question, why are there separate caucuses? Because this is same politics. And that is one category of the diagnosis. And then the second most important thing, which he, in his characterization of the politics of South Africa, was his illustration that most people don't realize why a white minority, which for the longest time was less than 5% of the population, got to be colonial conquerors and masters over a huge population for a long period of time. Then he says that they achieved that through divide and conquer, like that when we fought against colonial invasion, we fought as small clans and groupings. So they were able to defeat each and every one of us. And then later on, they combined all of us and then declared rulership and conquerorship over all the black majority and Africans in particular. That, but otherwise, there was never a time where we fought as a collective whole. So the ANC was an attempt in 1912 to unify all the forces of resistance against colonial invasion. But the manner in which it was originally conceptualized was somehow collaborationist, because it was about deputations and begging the colonial masters that please include some of us, not all of us, include some of us into the colonial government. That is what, that was the original demand of the South African Natives National Congress.
And begging the Queen and all that.
Yeah, they were always like begging the Queen for inclusion in terms of what got to happen. And then he says that I'm realizing that there's beginning to be a resurfacing of the same phenomenon now, where the descendants of colonial settlers are stratifying black political voices. First, they bought the ANC successfully through Cyril Ramaphosa, through a conference which was bought, and then every political party which they want to have control over, they just give a lot of money, like in finance, because they wanted to have the same circumstances where they control these small fiefdoms of so-called political parties, knowing that they can't fight back as a unified whole. Because whenever there's a possibility of unification, like there almost was unification on the policy issue on the land question, then they realized that their capitalist, ill-gotten wealth interest will be threatened. I thought that is the very profound and most important characterization of South Africa's politics, that it forms a solid foundation on why we need to unify the forces of resistance against neocolonialism, the forces of resistance against the continued super exploitation of our natural resources and of our people.